Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Carolyn Streeter. I live in the center of town here, and I started talking with CeCe a couple months ago when I was looking for good information on cell towers, good science-backed information. So we're so glad to have CeCe here tonight. Please talk to me afterwards.
Thank you, Carolyn. So my name is CeCe Dubois. I'm from Ashland, about an hour away from here, and I'm honored to be with you tonight to talk about the risks of today's wireless technology and solutions to use technology beneficially, but with minimal risks. So like many of you, I didn't know much, that there was even much to know about wireless technology. And I spent years running the local education foundation in Ashland when my children were in schools. And that was at the time that we kept hearing about the 21st century classroom and how our kids were going to need all this new technology to succeed in life. So, good doobie parents, we jumped in, we started doing all this fundraisers, we got wireless infrastructure, we got iPads and Chromebooks and minis and smartboards. And then one night at book group, my girlfriend, who's an electrical engineer, tipped us off that there could be something biologically impactful with wireless. And so I went, And then not long after that, I read something insinuating the same thing, and I went, wow, if there's anything to this, I'd like to know, because I just spent 8 years bringing it into my schools. And so I'm a technical and professional writer by trade. And I just started looking for the peer-reviewed scientific literature. And I was astounded to discover literally thousands of peer-reviewed, published studies in highly credible scientific publications that showed extensive biological harm. A number of the scientists from around the world got together and started pulling together all of the studies and assessing what the biological risk is. There's a document called the Bioinitiative Report, which is about 1,600 pages deep. This is what the cover looks like. And what I want to do with you is share summary of key scientific evidence. Evidence for damage to sperm and reproduction. And it was actually the sperm studies that got me on my feet. They've taken male human sperm, exposed it to a laptop with the antennas turned on, and it changed the DNA, it slowed the motility, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable in just 4 hours of exposure. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. My oldest daughter at the time, we just sent up to St. Mike's with her MacBook. My youngest just went into high school, and of course we had given her for Christmas a laptop, and both my girls are using them right on top of their reproductive organs. So that was the day that I found my voice on this issue, and I started raising my hands and my little knocking knees at school going, guys, I think we got a problem here. And I got back crickets. And so I just started sharing. You know, the French National Library took Wi-Fi out in 2008 because of the health considerations. There were pockets in Belgium and Israel and Italy that were removing it from their schools because of the biological risks. So it was those sperm studies that got me on my feet. Evidence that children are more vulnerable. They're not just little adults, as we know. Their central nervous system is still under construction. Their immune system is still under construction. Their skulls are thinner, and their brains have a higher water content. So literally, pound for pound, they're absorbing more radiation than you and I, and it's not good for you and I. Evidence for fetal and neonatal effects. We know this causes DNA damage, and during those early months of cell generation, when a baby's being formed, that's the most vulnerable time when we should really, really be protecting our kids. On the table here, you're welcome to take pictures of any of the books if it looks like something you might want to read later. But anything on the front, the cards, you can take with you. There's one there called the Baby Safe Project, and that's Dr. Hugh Taylor, who runs the OBGYN program at Yale. And he has done some of the lab studies with the rodents. We use rodents because that's how we determine in science whether something is going to have an impact on a human later. And when Dr. Taylor was doing the rodent studies and exposing these pregnant mice to radiofrequency radiation, which is what wireless radiation is, those pups came out damaged. They emitted symptoms that looked a lot like ADD, ADHD, bouncing off the walls, not a care in the world. So we've got really heavy-hitting science behind this, but we don't know about it, and I'll talk about that in a moment. One of you, when we were getting set up in here, asked about autism. Dr. Martha Herbert runs the autism lab, or founded the autism lab at Mass General. She sees huge correlations between the families in her care and what we know scientifically about microwave radiation, which is what this radio frequency is. So, you know, we never even stop to think, okay, we're not using cables or cords anymore. How does our information get from there to here? It's two-way microwave radio frequency radiation. That's what's low level, non-ionizing, non-thermal, no heat. But the scientific literature is very clear that non-ionizing radiation is extraordinarily biologically harmful. We have a new term called electrohypersensitivity or electromagnetic illness. That's when our bodies can no longer operate properly because of these interfering frequencies that we are immersed in with electrosmog. And many who become electromagnetically ill, if you remove the exposures, they can live a good, healthy life. If you put a cell tower in somebody's front yard or their backyard or on top of their building, your body will never, ever get a break, right? You can control your cell phone, you can control your baby monitor, your gaming device, your Roku, your Chromecast, your Ring, your Bluetooth, all that's under your control. But when the wireless industry forces this toxic technology into our neighborhoods, then that's when citizens like you and I need to find our voice, because they're ruthless, they care not one whit about your health, and all of our public servants, by and large, have been told, hey, it's the law. The Telecom Act of 1996 says if you have a problem with environmental issues, gosh, sorry, you can't sue us, right? So that's where the law is today. So they come into our towns and they say, oh gosh, you know, the law says you have to let us put these cell towers up basically wherever we want. And that is not what the law says. There are many things a community can do proactively to protect yourselves. The first thing is to start looking at your zoning bylaws and put setbacks from neighborhoods, put setbacks from schools, from churches, from hospitals, from senior centers, from playing fields. But if you don't know to do that, and they come in with an application and say, here we go, we want to put these cell towers right here, and you look at your bylaws and there's nothing in there protecting you, then you're a sitting duck. So it's critically important that citizens help to inform and empower your public servants, because without you guys, we know how busy they are. None of us in a million years ever imagined this would be on our plate. And we've got to make room for it, because the industry cares not about you or your children or your pollinators in your garden. They just want their bottom line. So, effects for the blood-brain barrier, that's a membrane we have that is meant to keep toxins out of sensitive areas in the brain. We also have gut barriers as well. What the scientific literature is showing us is this constant pulsing of microwave radiation is permeating that blood-brain barrier. And so now, where even just regular daily wear and tear, our blood will flush that out, right, as part of our circadian rhythm. So here goes the blood, and now the blood-brain barrier is open. Now that blood with its toxins can go right into the brain. We have increases in PANS and PANDAS and other neurological diseases that were not even part of our vocabulary not too long ago. So for years, the industry would say, oh, well, there's no mechanism of harm identified let's just keep doing what we're doing. Well, we now have solid science showing many mechanisms of harm. That blood-brain barrier compromise is just one of them. Melatonin is another really important part of our regular cell repair, regeneration. It helps to regulate sleep. In the wee hours of darkness, as part of our circadian rhythm, the pineal gland releases melatonin. Melatonin goes in, regulates sleep, and helps to detoxify the body every day in the wee hours of darkness. So when we have this light energy form that is microwave radiation, it's invisible to you and I, but our brain senses it, and it thinks the lights are on. And so guess what? Now the brain is becoming dysregulated in its ability to release the melatonin to go in and do all of our proper cell repair and regeneration. So we get this whole trickle-down effect. If we're not sleeping right, if our body's not able to do it, then we start getting into all sorts of health complications. Some of you might have been around years ago, decades ago, when the first neuro-oncologist, or the husband of the woman who died, got on Larry King Live and said, my patient died of these unusual tumors on the side of her brain, not in the brain where they would normally develop, but on the side of her brain, and they happened to line up with the antenna in her cell phone. Well, that became a PR nightmare overnight for the wireless industry. And they stepped, because they didn't do any pre-market safety testing. There has never been biological safety testing before this was all rolled out into the commercial sector. So industry steps up and says, well, that's terrible. We have the money, let's partner with the government and we will do the science. So they hire this Dr. George Carlo. Dr. Carlo puts in place about 200 scientists, and this is back in the 90s. And for a couple of years they do the science. And Dr. Carlo comes back and says, it does look like that cell phone probably killed that woman, and children are particularly vulnerable. At that point, non-captive government agencies should have invoked what's called the precautionary principle. If it looks like there's something wrong, stop what you're doing, figure it out, and if it's safe, then go ahead and continue. But we did not invoke the precautionary principle. Instead, they stuffed it. Dr. Carlo was disparaged. At one point, his house was burnt down. And they just continued to market more and more and more wireless technology. So as I was learning about all this, I kept thinking, if this is as bad as the science is telling me, surely somebody must have our backs on this. And I fell down the rabbit hole in 2013. In 2015, Harvard Law School Center for Ethics came up with this free online 59-page report called Captured Agency, how the Federal Communications Commission is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. So I start reading Captured Agency, and they're likening the wireless industry to the big tobacco playbook. Suppress the evidence of harm. They own the media, right? Take a close look at what you're seeing on TV, in radio. 5G, 5G, bigger, better, more, faster, 5G. And I don't know if anybody, I just watched Being the Ricardos, the Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz movie. And it was so clear in there that when they were trying to let Lucy be pregnant, when she was pregnant with little Ricky, nobody had ever had a pregnant woman on a TV show before. That was totally taboo. And so they're calling all these meetings, and of course Philip Morris, the two guys from Philip Morris were in there because follow the dollar. They drive every decision that hits the public, right? So you're not going to find credible information through mainstream media today, and this explains why. Because these are captured federal agencies, captured by perhaps the most powerful industry in the world right now. And they, every time a good scientific study comes out, they'll bury it. They will put spin on it to create doubt. You know, some of you may have read the book, Doubt is Their Product. That's what these big companies do. And then they'll come up with their own studies that were designed under conditions to deliberately show no harm. And then they'll promote those to give the public a false sense of safety. Well, no harm is never the same thing as safe. So they can put all the spin on it they want, but the science is still very clear that this is very biologically active. So when captured agency came out, I'm like, oh, so nobody's got our backs on this. So that's why it's up to you and I. And it's common sense. Once you know what the risks are, you're like, if I have a choice, why wouldn't I just fix this and go about my merry way and have even better technology than wireless? And we'll walk through those solutions in a little bit too. So as I'm figuring all this out and I'm raising my hands at my school going, guys, I think we got a problem here, I thought they would respond as if we had a chemical leak in the science lab at school, right? Get the kids out of the building first of all, and then fix it, and then bring them back in. Again, crickets. And our school committee chairwoman and I, she was an attorney, mother of 4 kids, and a yoga instructor, you know, just a really great woman. She and I were sharing information back and forth. You know, did you see what this study says? Did you see what this country did? And ultimately, one of our other school committee members, who had been our former chairwoman, went and looked at the top lobbyists in Washington, D.C. And when you look at the top 100 of all time, you've got wireless, you've got energy, you've got telecom, you know, you've got tech, all the big money. So that's what's going toward our politics. So she's like, it does look like it's possible that there could be a conflict of interest going on. So, you know, I'm learning every day from everybody around me. So I was grateful to know, to look through some of these other lenses that I'd never had to look at before. So when we brought this issue up in our schools, they assigned a subcommittee, and that subcommittee decided to put this little sign up in all of our classrooms. Today it reads, best practices for mobile devices. Turn off the device when not in use. The industry wants us to have all Wi-Fi all the time. Well, we don't need it on if we're not actually using that particular antenna. Turn the Wi-Fi on only when needed. Always place a mobile device on a solid surface, and you know, keep your distance. When I was a little kid, my mom would say, don't stand in front of the television, you'll ruin your eyes, right? Those were regular electromagnetic fields that were coming off of there, and she was right. You know, that disrupts our body too, so some things drop off with distance. And what happened was, when I saw what they produced, it said best practices for Wi-Fi safety. And then when they rolled it out during the first day back to school for teachers and did the staff training, it was like they dumbed it down to best practices for mobile devices. And I'm like, I don't know, I don't think in terms of mobile devices. If someone says a Wi-Fi thing, that I can figure out, right? So they put up this sign, they talk about it for a second, and then they go on to anti-bullying, physical restraint, mandated report, and I'm like, wait, what just happened? They didn't actually tell the teachers that this is two-way microwave radiation, and that children, the elderly, pregnant women, and anybody with an existing health condition is particularly vulnerable to this, and it's not great for the rest of us. I'm like, well, what the heck just happened? They didn't even tell the teachers it's radiation. So I went to our school superintendent the next day and I said, Mr. Adams, first, let me just say how grateful I am that we even did this, because by then I had been watching school committee meetings all over the country where they're so deep in bed with industry, and they've invested so much of the school's money in all of this wireless that they don't want to hear about this. They want to have the latest and greatest, right? So I was very grateful that we even had our little sign. I said, but Jim, they didn't tell the teachers that this is two-way microwave radiation that the science is showing is really bad. And he just went, and he was new, he was our new superintendent. He said, honestly, CeCe, all I can do is what school committee commission me to do, right? But he shared with me that his 2 little boys, who he lives in a different town, so different school district, he went and checked to see how much Wi-Fi was in his kids' schools. And at that point, only the children with individualized education plans had been issued the tablets, and they were using them as communication vehicles for their disabilities. So I said, well, that's great. So I'm thinking, okay, he gets it. He knows there's something here to be concerned about. And I said, well, if you can't take it any further in the schools, how about we just train the parents? Because they would know to create a safe sleeping area at home so the children and the parents can all do proper repair and regeneration at night. He just held up his hands. He said, I'm sorry, I've taken it as far as I can. So I'm thinking, okay, well, how do we educate the community, right? And so I started thinking, running the Education Foundation, I had the privilege of working with my state legislators. They would come in and do fundraising with us, and so I had a lovely rapport with Senator Karen Spilka, who's my senator in Ashland, and at the time Tom Sanacandra was our state rep. So I met with each of them, and then I went and met with Karen Spilka in district at our little coffee shop during her office hours there. And I go in, and I'm showing the science, and I'm showing Ashland's little sign, and then I measured Senator Spilka's laptop and her district director's cell phone. And when I measured, both those devices went right off the charts. So this is what we call a radio frequency radiation detection meter. And if there were no radio frequencies in here, when I turn this on, it would not do much. Right now it's reading high at 997. The unit of measurement is called microwatt per square meter. In an indoor space, the science indicates we want to be at 10 or less. In our sleeping areas, because we need to do that cell repair and regeneration, they want us to be at 0.1 or less. Walking around outdoors, they ask that we try to keep it under 1,000 because you're on the go, so you might not be totally immersed. Today's a different story with 5G coming in. But that 1,000 outdoors presumes that you have control over your indoor environment, and you can go home and have a safe environment. So this just popped up to 1,070, but I want to show you what happens when I keep mine in airplane mode as a rule, my cell phone. But watch what, get ready guys, watch what happens when I take this out of airplane mode. And all the little antennas in here start connecting to the cell towers, to the routers, right? Inside this one device, there's a bunch of different antennas that independently go, here I am, where are you? Here I am, where are you? To the cell towers and the routers. And so this has a cellular antenna, a data antenna, a Bluetooth antenna, a Wi-Fi antenna, a locator antenna, a hotspot antenna. So that's 6 of them right there. If anybody didn't know any better than to upgrade to a 5G phone, you've now got additional antennas in there. So this all sounds like really bad news. But the good news is, well, I'm going to put my phone back in airplane mode so that I'm not exposing myself to anything that I don't want to be. This hit a level of 145,000 microwatts per square meter. That's over 1 million times too high for a sleeping area. And how many people today are sleeping with their cell phones? How many children were issued a school tablet like a Chromebook and have those things in their bedroom? I was on a call one time with, there was a doctor who had a 12-year-old who wound up with jaw cancer because he was sleeping with his tablet under his pillow. So this is not a toy. This is not something we should be exposing our children to. So It's invisible, but it's all around us unless we make choices for ourselves and then for our communities to do better. So that's all the bad news. Let's move on to some of the good news. The FCC just got sued for ignoring the science. Again, 1996 with the Telecom Act, that's when they said, okay, we're going to allow this much radiation. And in order to have any problem with that, you're going to have heat from a device to raise the temperature of your skin. So long as there's no heat, we're good. We can expose you at this much radiation. All that scientific literature I just recited shows biological effects at hundreds of thousands of times below that. No heat, non-ionizing, low level, non-thermal. So the science is clear. What's not clear is the disinformation that's being given to the public. Can I see a show of hands if anybody has an iPhone with you tonight? Okay. I'd ask you to take your iPhone out, and I want to show you something because we know this is a tough conversation to open up with others, but I'll give you a little party trick. Go into settings, and give me a nod when you get into settings. Settings?
At the very bottom.
I turned mine off about 10 minutes ago.
Thank you. You can do this in airplane mode and you won't get radiated. But once you're in settings, scroll down just a little bit and hit general. Okay. From general, go all the way down to the bottom, and there you'll see legal and regulatory. Hit that. And then next you'll see a little list, and maybe 4 or 5 down you'll see RF exposure. That is radio frequency radiation that they politely call energy in their fine print disclaimer. And it's two-way microwave radiation, and in those paragraphs there it says, we tested this device at a distance from the body. So if you don't maintain that distance, you're going to exceed the FCC's limits for public radiation exposure, which we know are astronomically too high anyway. So anybody who holds a cell phone while it's actively transmitting, or tucks it in their bra, or their shirt pocket, or their suit pocket, or puts it in their yoga pants, or their back pockets, you're exceeding the FCC's public radiation exposure limits. And who knew that was in there, right? In the next paragraph, it says to use a hands-free option like speakerphone, because distance is your friend. There is no safe level of microwave radiation in the scientific literature. So creating distance is helpful, but it never is going to mean you're safe, right? So if you're not on the go, you might circle your tail for a while as you research this, and I say don't take my word on any of this. Go look at the credible information that's out there so that you really know this. I circled my tail for a bit because I didn't have anybody I could talk to at my day when I fell down the rabbit hole. For 2 years, I was the only person I knew I could talk to, and I wasn't even sure I knew what I was saying. But then I said, you know what? I'm going to protect my kids and my husband and my family. So I walked around my house and I went, I think I've got 5 decked cordless phones sitting all over my house, and those are like little cell towers in your own home. And then there's the router that we got for the triple play with internet, computer, telephone. Well, what's that thing doing? And then there was the microwave oven, but luckily that only transmits when you turn it on. It's all this wireless stuff that's transmitting all the time. And for my microwave oven, by the way, I turned it on and I went with my meter and I went through my kitchen, I went through my foyer, I went out my front porch, and it was still in the red zone. And I've never seen one that doesn't leak like a sieve. I have a colleague in Europe, he put his in his back pantry and he leaves the entire room when he's one of the scientists, when he has to use it. So there are ways to address all of this. Many of you may already have Ethernet jacks in your home, right? This is what I use. It's what I've always used with my hardwired computer. There's an Ethernet jack in the wall. The wires behind the wall go down to my basement and connect to the router that's down there, right? So what's powering the router? The router is getting all of its signal off the street through cabling. So cabling is the right solution, be it high-speed cable, fiber optics, high-speed copper, whatever. You just don't want these waves going through the air because they're going through you as well. So in my home, after I stopped circling my tail, we just plug back in, right? All you gotta do is get an Ethernet cable, plug it into the back of your router. It's got little jack ports in it. And then run a big long cable to wherever you use most of your technology. In many cases, you've got more than one device. There's a little thing called an Ethernet switch. This one has 5 ports in it, so you would plug the other end of this into the switch and then get little cables for your phone, for your tablet, your laptop, whatever you use. And the nice thing is that each one of these little ports has its own internet address. So you're not competing for bandwidth. You've all got really good signal coming in. And the kicker is, not only is it safer, but you will get screaming fast speeds, and your signal will be far more reliable. Wireless technology consumes 10 times more energy than simply hardwiring, right? All that charging we do, all those apps that we've been talked into putting on our wireless devices, in the background, they're churning all the time doing updates and stuff. So let's start being selective consumers. Start with everything off, and then just turn on what you need when you need it. It's not rocket science, and who knew? For like 20 or 30 bucks, this little adapter, it's called a lightning adapter, you can hardwire a cell phone. So anything you're doing on the internet, you can just turn off the antennas and do it right through a little tiny adapter. So that's what our towns and our schools should be promoting for the children. They should be providing not wireless hotspots, but Ethernet cables and adapters to the tablets. And then just teach them to go in and turn off the antennas, and you have perfectly safe technology. So I worked with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, their Bureau of Environmental Health, back in 2016. And we had had a panel of world-leading experts come to our State House, because Senator Spilka actually introduced a bill on my behalf. Let's get the right minds together at the table at the state level, investigate, and see what we can do to have excellent technology, but safely. So when that panel of experts was here, led by Dr. Deborah Davis, she's an epidemiologist and one of our country's leading scientists, she went over to the Department of Public Health and had a former colleague there in Suzanne Condon. And they were still in recovery mode from 9/11 when everybody's budgets got slashed to the bone. They lost epidemiology positions. These are the scientists who go out into the communities and figure out what's happening with toxins. So they were just getting funding back to be able to rehire 2 epidemiologists. So they had to get their staffing done, their hiring, their training, and then they said, we're gonna work on this. That was in the summer of 2015. The summer of 2016 rolled around and I'm going, ooh, we're about to lock the kids in the schools with wireless radiation again. What can we do? So I approached Dr. Bob Knorr, who was in charge of the Bureau of Epidemiology at the Department of Public Health, and I said, Dr. Knorr, I'm a tech writer. I've been studying this issue for years, and what I haven't figured out, I've been so blessed to be connected with a lot of the world's leading scientists and doctors. And at that point, that was when we were, as parents, getting fact sheets sent home from the schools for lead in drinking water, for the H1N1, problems we were having. I said, how about if I took that lead sheet and hollowed it out and made it be an electromagnetic fields fact sheet. So EMF stands for electromagnetic fields, and that's this pulsation of radiation that's coming out at you from your radio frequency devices. So Dr. Knorr said, that would be great, thank you. So I did, I went to town on this. And by then, he had hired one of his new epidemiologists and assigned her, Glenn and Barrison, to work with me on this. And we went through a couple revisions, and they said, okay, this looks good. We're gonna run it up the chain of command. And I said, so what do you think's gonna happen? And he said, well, we'll probably have it out in about 3 months. And this was in the fall of 2016, and I thought, cool. Then winter came, and I checked back in, and they said, oh yeah, we still got our eye on this, you know, juggling priorities. And season upon season, year upon year, here we are 6 years later. This has never seen the light of day.
Huh.
So I was also going and speaking to the Department of Education. There was a dad out in Pepperell who found my work and asked me to come in and speak to his school district, and we did, and God bless Keith, he would go every school committee meeting, and he wasn't browbeating them, he was being polite, he's presenting the facts, and there's so many new facts to present every time, and they're all looking like deer in the headlights. And so Keith had 2 little girls at the time, and he writes to the Department of Education and says, can you please prove to me that it's safe for me to leave my 2 daughters in the public schools with wireless radiation for 13 years out of their developmental lives? And they were gracious to reply, and they said, well, this is probably more of a Department of Public Health issue. So he goes to the Department of Public Health, and he's told, well, we're sort of working on this, but we don't have anything for you right now. So Keith goes back to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and says, guys, the buck has to stop here. You guys are bringing this technology in. And he went and looked at his school ratings at the, the board website and realized that our schools are being held accountable by the state for implementing all this technology. So that's why school committee members might look at you like deer in the headlights, because their jobs are on the line, their funding is on the line, if they don't get a good review from the state. And as it turns out, the wireless industry is very clever. They got in at the state level and started promoting this 21st century classroom. They made sweetheart deals to get everybody started with the equipment, the tablets, the smart boards, all this wireless infrastructure. So our schools are between a rock and a hard place, but they are responsible for the welfare of our children. And so I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know it till Dr. Deborah Davis, this Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate on climate change, who brought this team to our State House to talk about wireless radiation. She pulled me aside and said, I don't know how you did this, but you're the first in the nation. And I was like, what? I'm one parent, one tech writer, one employee, because I was the grant coordinator for our schools at that point. And I thought maybe I was the first one around Metro West, but I had no idea we were breaking ground with this. So we have this sign in all of our classrooms in Ashland, but they're not doing it. They're waiting for higher authorities to tell them what to do. So that's when I went and met with Senator Spilka, and she introduced a bill on my behalf. She put me with a lawyer in her office, and we crafted this commission bill. It was introduced in 2015. I had people over here going, oh, good luck to you. If it comes in under constituent request, under my name, that's like a red flag. They've got thousands of bills to get through every 2 years. Good luck. And others would say, shh, a bill in Massachusetts never goes anywhere the first time it's introduced. So I'm like, okay, but it's better than what we had, and I don't know where else to go with this. So being a tech writer, I went to the lawyer in Senator Spilka's office. I said, okay, we've got this bill. It's been assigned to the Joint Committee on Public Health. Now what happens? He said, sometime in the next 18 months, your bill will come up for public hearing, and you will have 3 minutes to testify. And I went, okay, that doesn't seem like an awful lot, but hey, better than what we had 5 minutes ago. So that same summer that Dr. Deborah Davis brought this panel of experts to our State House to ask for right-to-know legislation, my bill came up for public hearing. And so being the tech writer that I am, I thought, well, maybe if I just make a template with all of the legislators' addresses on it and send it out to people, because by then I'd been meeting people in Massachusetts, which was just so validating and refreshing to find others who knew about this. Would you please send in a statement of support? And so I also sent it to the scientists that I had come to know, and to the engineers who figured this out, and to the physicists, and to Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada. When he retired, he was like, well, what do we really know about this? He knew enough for being in the industry, never to have wireless in his home. And when his daughters were teenagers and clamoring for the devices that all the other kids were being given, he wouldn't give them the smartphones. But he says, what do we really know? So instead of just kicking back and enjoying his plush retirement, Frank Clegg went out and sought out a dozen of the world's leading scientists whose life's work is radio frequency radiation. And he came back and said, in North America, our FCC guidelines in the US are not safe, Canada's Safety Code 6 is not safe, and Frank Clegg has been up there in Canada trying to get Parliament to move on this, but they have agencies as captured as we've got here in the US. So we got all this public record built, and lo and behold, my bill was actually reported out favorably by the Joint Committee on Public Health the first time we introduced it. And I was congratulated on that and said, this almost never, I said, yeah, but you haven't fixed anything. Nobody knows to just turn this stuff off or use it as sparingly as you can. So I said, so what do we do now? It went to the next committee, the Healthcare Joint Committee on Finance, and it just got sent to study, which means it goes to the graveyard, and you may bring it back to the next session if you're so inclined. So he said, come back in the fall and we'll revisit. So I come back in the fall. He says, oh yeah, we were just talking about what's coming out of district. Let me check my notes. And he goes, oh, she is going to bring your bill back, and she's going to bring it back under her own name. And I thought, that sounds like a step in the right direction. And I don't know anything about how our legislature works, right? So I'm learning as we go. And Karen Spilka brought it back under her own name. And by then, she was the chairwoman of the Senate Ways and Means Committee, which basically is in control of the purse strings in Massachusetts. So it's a very empowered position. And she toes the line. She's very by the books. And for her to introduce that bill, I think said a lot, because she didn't introduce a lot of legislation, because everything comes across her desk in the end. So she has to be very judicious. So we got that bill through the Public Health Committee again. And I'll tell you, when we're in there testifying for our 3 minutes, I'm in there, I'm holding up the science, I'm holding up I'm showing the radiation in the room, and I'm looking at the eyes of every member on the Joint Committee on Public Health, and I could tell this was brandy new news to every one of them. And I went, oh, 3 minutes isn't going to cut it. So I have my poor husband. I have spent years going into the State House, driving in, going from office to office to office, meeting with legislator after legislator, legislative lawyer, chief of staff, teaching everybody what this issue is. Now, mind you, we wrote that bill in 2014, and here we stand here in 2022. And we had other bills start popping up out of the woodworks. So bills had to be filed by like a certain Friday in February. And before 5 o'clock on that day, another bill shows up asking our Department of Education to address this issue. Here in Massachusetts, we have the Fay School in St. Mark's in Southborough. Fay School is the little guys that feeds up into St. Mark's, and this is where like Saudi princes send their sons to be educated. Very, very prestigious international boarding school. And there was a little boy, age 10, who kept winding up in the nurse's office. Headaches, nosebleeds, nausea, dizziness, cognitive impairment, can't think, can't focus. And so mom and dad leave work, they come get him, they take him to the doctors run the tests they know to run, they come up empty. This goes on for like 2 years. And then the parents start saying, well, what if we look at, what are his symptoms? what could be causing those? So they start diving into the research and they discover electromagnetic illnesses, right? So then they find out that you have to have a doctor who's trained in environmental medicine in addition to regular medicine, but what all of our environmental toxins are doing to us. So they get a doctor's diagnosis, they go to the administrators at the Faith School and say, we have an understanding that this high-powered Wi-Fi in the schools is making our child ill. Could we please get accommodations so that the classrooms that he's in are just hardwired and no radiation? Well, unfortunately, the Faith School is known to disenroll families that raise any kind of an issue because they've got an international wait list a mile long. So they did not offer that family accommodations. So then the parents thought, well, maybe if we get some more data. So they hooked the little boy up with a dosimeter, which is what medical professionals will wear to monitor their heart rate when they're administering treatments with radio frequency. Because we know in a controlled medical setting, you can do some really important things. You can stimulate stem cell growth. You can stimulate bone growth. But in this uncontrolled, ubiquitous way that we're now kind of engulfed in this, you can't control it. So they hook them up with a dosimeter and they do, you know, this is like a $400 device. They hooked him up with a professional high-end one that actually records the data as he goes through his day at the Faith School. At the end of the day, they look at the data from the dosimeter and they look at the data from the radio frequency detector. And as he went throughout the school building, his little heart and the radiation went in tandem like this throughout the day. So now they've got hard data and they go back to the administrator and say, now can we please get accommodations? We have medical evidence that this radiation is affecting our son's biology. No go. They come back a third time and say, we are privileged to be in a position, could we please pay out of pocket to hardwire the 10 classrooms that our now 7th grade son would need to be in? And once again, the school denied them the accommodation. So under the Americans with Disabilities Act, if there is something going on that impairs one or two of your life's daily functions, then you are a protected class, right? Children, whether you're in a private school or a public school, you are all protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so this family wound up suing in federal court, right in Worcester, to get accommodation. So their son, who's been in this district his whole life, all his buddies are there, he's an excellent student, his teachers love him, he loves his teachers, and now he can't even physically be in the school, right? So this has been extremely disruptive. So it goes through the courts, and although they did not win the case, because at that time they were not able to conclusively prove that it was the school's Wi-Fi that it was doing to him, but for the first time in U.S. history, in our court system, they acknowledged through the testimonies of world-leading scientists and doctors who came in to testify that yes, you don't have to have heat to have harm from one of these devices. There are serious effects of the non-thermal, low-level, non-ionizing radiation exposures. So that was a big win, and you know, I'm learning as I go, so I'm like, okay, you don't necessarily in the courts get the big win. One wins this, and then you build on it, and then you build on it, and then you build on it. And oftentimes courts will just throw things out because they don't want to deal with it, and then you do an appeal, so it kind of weeds things out. So there are people dealing with the appeals. But as far as good news goes, so yeah, so now we had another bill that popped up to get the Department of Education to do something. So I went, that dad who figured out in Pepperell that their school committee didn't feel empowered to fix this, he included me on the conversations with the Board of Education, and so I went and met with the gentleman who was in charge of the Office of Digital Learning. Nicest guy you'd ever want to meet. He had 2 little kids in the public schools. He had no idea that this grooming by the industry was harming our children. So he said, you need to go to a Board of Education meeting. Go to one of their monthly boards. I said, okay, how do I do that? Where do I go? So I figure out how to get on their calendar, and I drive out to Malden. And again, you get, what, 3 minutes? So I'm showing them what I came to show them, and I could see they're listening, but I have presented to them on numerous occasions. Others have gone in, and one of our commissioners, the commissioner, one of them, Commissioner Mitchell, died in office, so they had an interim one, this Dr. Wolfson. So then they got Riley, who we have now. And I went to a meeting, and Wolfson was still sitting there in the audience, just kind of keeping an eye on things, and I just sat right down next to him. I said, sir, are you guys putting plans together to protect our children? And he just said, oh, we're waiting for higher authorities. It is laughable. It's so sad. It is so sad. We were at epidemic proportions of anxiety and depression before this pandemic made everybody else so emotionally and socially awkward and sick. We were at epidemic proportions before that. Suicide rates among kids were higher than they've ever been. This is a neurotoxin. And to have people in charge tell us that, I mean, what is going on, right? I said, okay, Dr. Wilson, well, you know I wrote this EMF fact sheet with our Department of Public Health back in 2016. Who do they report to? And he said, Mary Lou Sutter with the Department of Health and Human Services. The Executive Office of Health and Human Services reports directly into Governor Baker. And she's the little petite woman that stands next to him for all the COVID press conferences. That's Mary Lou Sutter. So I reached out to her office, and she set me up with 2 associates in her office. One is the liaison to the State House. And I knew by then, don't go it alone. That's what I learned in Ashland. Even though, Lord knows how we got this far, but we're the first in the United States to do this, I was one voice. And our superintendent told me as much. I said, Mr. Adams, we have this new $30 million study out from our own government, the U.S. National Toxicology Program. They are the gold standard in the world on toxics research. And they have determined clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage and a host of other ailments. I said, now can we protect the kids? And he just went, CeCe, you're only one voice. So that's why I want to give every one of you in this room a big old pat on the back for showing up. Because one voice is very easily swept under the rug, but when you get others informed, and it's common sense, this thing's radiating me. What can I do to not have it radiate me? What can I do to protect my sleep? Right? It's not rocket science. Turn it off. Put it on a timer for starters. Right? So I met with Mary Lou Sutter's office at the Executive Office of Health and Human Services in the summer of 2019 now. And I brought with me my district director from Senator Spilka's office. I brought with me the gentleman from the Department of Education. I brought with me the research analyst from the Joint Committee on Public Health. And I brought with me a half a dozen citizens from all across the Commonwealth, so they can't just think this is my problem. And I gave a half-hour presentation with discussion. I thought it went very well. The gentleman who was the liaison from Health and Human Services to the State House, he said, you know, I was coming into work one day. He works in the McCormick building right next to the State House. He said, it struck me as odd that Verizon was putting up a light post in front of our building. Well, that wasn't a light post. It was a 5G small cell antenna. A cell tower at street level, and there was one on the other corner of the building too. And there's one in front of the State House, and they are all over Boston. So Rob and I, he is from Natick, and there's an international study going on right now where Dr. Magda Havas up in Canada, who taught electromagnetics at Trent University for 25 years, she knows our governments are not protecting us, and nobody's measuring all this cumulative radiation from the cell towers, from the small cells, from everybody's devices, all of it. Nobody is checking. So she has a study called the Global EMF Monitoring Project. And this meter is what she's recommending. So anybody who wants to participate in the study, and I personally love having a meter because now with 5G and the Internet of Things, they want to stick a transmitter, a radio frequency radiation transmitter, in every device so they can harvest your data and sell it. That's the money to be made. That's one of their new revenue streams. So Rob and I walked through Natick in their downtown area and took measurements. I did it in Ashland, I did it in Framingham, and when I went to the North End, show of hands, anybody who's eaten in the North End on Hanover Street, all that great Italian food. You walk down Hanover Street and you see this really pretty, what look like wrought iron street lamps. They're cell towers. And when I did a walkthrough of the North End with a woman who lives there, we were getting readings of like 630,000. And you know there are people living right on top of those. And you want to be at 0.01 in your sleeping areas. You want to be at 10 indoors. And these things just pulse and pulse and pulse. So a megahertz is a unit of measurement. That means 1,000,000 times per second. This radiation's carrying your data and going on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, off. And that's what our poor little cells are up against all the time. With 5G, they want to push us up into the gigahertz range, which is billions of cycles per second. On, off, on, off, on. You know, it's like a jackhammer to our poor bodies. The good news, when you can control it, time and again people come back and say, CeCe, I didn't want to believe any of this. I didn't want to, and I'm like, welcome to the club. I didn't want to know any of this. And they'll say, but you know, it was starting to resonate with me when you started describing microwave sickness. Headaches, nosebleeds, nausea, dizziness, anxiety, insomnia, cognitive impairment, pain from unidentified sources, migraines, skin, heating, flushing, tingling, rashes, right? Heartbeats that go too fast or too slow depending on what your biomakeup is. And they'll come back and say, oh my gosh, I turned it all off. I slept for the first time in ages, right? I took my meter to my mom's place in Oregon. She was in a little senior bungalow. And I did a walkthrough and I showed her what her exposures are. In her little single bedroom, she had the decked cordless phone base, your own little cell tower in there, pulsing all the time. In Europe, they have technology that keeps those in eco mode and they only transmit when there's a call in play. In the US, they block that technology. And so those pulse like a cell tower all the time. Her router was in her bedroom, pulsing, pulsing, pulsing. We got her an Ethernet cable for her computer and just called up the internet company and said, we just want to turn off whatever's pulsing out of that box. And when I did that in my own home, they said, oh, just sit down at your computer. We'll show you how. Really, I can do that from here? They said, yeah. They taught me how to get into my online account with Verizon or Comcast, how to go into wireless settings, find all those antennas and just go off, apply. And then you get a little message saying, you know you're cutting off everybody's Wi-Fi. I'm like, yes, thank you very much. And then I took my meter and I measured. So we remediated my mom's place and I taught her how to keep her cell phone in airplane mode unless she needs it. And the next time I called her, she said, you know that night you left? I slept for 10 hours. I said, wow, that sounds pretty good. What do you normally do? And she said, I don't. She said it would take me forever to fall asleep. I would wake up throughout the night. I'd be so loopy by the time I got up in the morning that I'd have to perch myself on the bed and stabilize myself before I felt solid enough to get up and go. And she was 92 at the time. And I said, so now what? And she goes, I've slept every night. I just get up and go. And she was still driving and doing her paintings. And so it can be life-changing just to have a 1-hour session like this to talk about it. So, as stagnant as we've been with the bills in Massachusetts, we, did anybody watch this film, Generation Zapped? Your library can requisition it for you, or you can get it through, I think, Amazon Prime, maybe Netflix. This is an excellent award-winning film. And when you start having these conversations with your loved ones or your colleagues, they're going to think you've lost your flipping mind because everybody loves their devices, and many people are physiologically, biologically addicted to their phones because this microwave radiation is hitting the same receptors in the brain as drugs and alcohol and pornography and gambling and tobacco. It is biologically addictive, so not everybody's going to be open to hearing this. You can just say, hey, you know what? There's this kind of cool movie. And it's really well done by an award-winning filmmaker. It's not fear-mongering. It's got some humor mixed in. But you'll hear from world-leading scientists and doctors. And I was very honored to be asked, and I've got my little, second of fame in there about Ashland being the first in the nation doing this too. But this is a great way to learn about this issue. So use that if you want. We did a screening at the State House. I was asked also to lead the technology panel at the Health and Buildings Roundtable Conference down at the National Institutes of Health. First time ever we're talking about this down at the NIH. This was amazing. We ran this on a continuous loop down there so people could just pop in and watch at their leisure. This is a good film. So we have been, well, for a while when we had libraries that were open, I was asked to come in and give presentations like this. We'd watch the film, and now that it's widely available, you can just watch it on your own time, and then we can just talk in here. So there was an art teacher at the River Valley Charter School up on the North Shore, and she became electromagnetically ill, and there was a router right above her in the classroom, and she had a wonderful principal. And the principal disabled the router, and in art class, you don't need technology, you want creativity, right? So she said, there's this woman who's doing screenings of this film. Can we do one here? So I was brought up to River Valley Charter School, and there was a nice room of parents, pediatricians, school administrators, and we had a great screening. And somebody in New Hampshire who had become sick from this found out about it and came. And she finally just felt so validated to be sitting in a room where we're having intelligent conversation about this. And so she said, will you come up to New Hampshire and do one at my library too? I said, I'm in. So I drove up to Deb's library in Stratham, and she'd been trying to tell her legislators about this. She invited them, but they couldn't make it that night. And then Representative Patrick Abrami was wanting to be reelected, and he was going door to door, and he knocks on Deb's door. And she invites him in, and she shares with him how her health was crashing. I mean, she was getting close to the coffin. She was really, really in rough shape. She goes to her doctors. They run the tests they know to run. Nothing. She starts paying thousands of dollars out of pocket to go to the specialists. They run the tests they know to run. Nothing. She starts doing her own research and figures out that her symptoms are aligning with microwave sickness or electromagnetic illness. She starts removing the exposures, and lo and behold, she starts getting better. And she said, but the coolest thing for my kids, once we removed the radiation from the house, we had these plants in the windowsill that for years just sat there. When we removed the radiation, they just went boom, and they grew like 15 inches or something. So yeah, we haven't really talked about the environmental impact. There's an entire other body of science showing what this is doing to our birds, to our bees, to our plants, to every biome out there, and it is not good. This affects every living cell. One very active community right now is Pittsfield, Massachusetts, out in the Berkshires, out by Lenox. And when the pandemic hit and the children were sent home to study and the parents were sent home to do their work, this neighborhood started seeing trucks coming down their little road and going into the woods behind their house. And they're like, what's going on? So they call the town and say, what's going on? And the town says, we don't know. They call the DPW, the Department of Public Works, doesn't know what's going on. They call the mayor's office, they don't know what's going on. They call their legislators, they don't know what's going on. They start talking to the guys in the trucks. They're going to put a cell tower on top of their neighborhood. Turns out that Verizon had applied for a permit in 2017 that lapsed. They came back and said, okay, now we're ready to put up a cell tower. And the town said, oh yeah, no, we've got to put out public notice on this. And they said, oh no, really, we don't. You don't have to do that. So nobody was notified. And the day, well, this little girl comes down one morning and says, Mommy, my head really, really hurts and I feel all buzzy inside. Mom calls Verizon and that was the day they turned on the cell tower. That little girl and her sister wound up sleeping with vomit buckets. The mom got sick, the dog was throwing up. They had to abandon their home once they figured out what was happening. And they bought a shack that had been abandoned for 10 years. It had like rat poop all over it, was uninhabitable, but that was their only alternative that they could afford to sleeping in a home that's under a cell tower. Other neighbors have had to abandon their homes. They've had to go stay in hotels. They've run out of money. They were sleeping in their cars. There are people who have sold their homes because they cannot physiologically be back in their homes. The ringing in the ears is so loud that they can't even function. The headaches, the nosebleeds, the nausea, the insomnia. One person was in remission from cancer. It came back and that person is now dead. There are others in the neighborhood who have developed cancer. This is happening right now in Pittsfield. Courtney brought me in to do a public, Courtney Gilardi is the mom who's not going to take this lying down. And she brought me in to do a community forum through their, one of the health agencies out in the Berkshires. So we got the ball rolling. She has since brought in doctors, scientists, engineers. And for the first time in the United States, it's taken 2 years. But they have a new Board of Health chairwoman, Bobby Orsi, who used to serve there years ago when they were up against PCBs. So she knows the corporate playbook. So Bobby Orsi has led her Board of Health, and they have just voted unanimously to issue a cease and desist order to Verizon to turn that cell tower off or move it. They are now lining up their legal ducks because either Verizon's going to come to the table and say, yeah, we don't want the bad PR and we're going to move this for you, or they're going to take it through the courts. So they are interviewing lawyers right now to protect the public. And what they have come to believe is that even though that Telecom Act of 1996 says you can't do anything about, saying there are health or environmental effects from this and turn down a cell tower application. That apparently only applies to the siting process. Once that's up, if something in the community is making our residents sick, it is the responsibility of the Board of Health to protect the public and the environment. So this is groundbreaking, and it's happening right now. And so we've been bringing in experts to Pittsfield to support them, to empower our public servants, because most of them are just good doobies who are volunteering in their community, right? All of our boards, very few of them get paid. We do have usually a public health agent who's a paid employee of the town. But by and large, these guys have only heard from industry. Industry owns mainstream media. How would they know differently? So when citizens can come together professionally and peacefully and intelligently and bring the facts forward, then we can make some progress. But one person cannot do it by herself. So you guys need to reach out to your friends, you need to reach out to your colleagues, your teachers, and really get the grassroots education going. And start looking at your bylaws. Do you have setbacks in your bylaws that protect neighborhoods so that you can't put a 5G small cell antenna in your front yard? That's what 5G is. So right now, all of your cell phones work using 3rd and 4th generation technology, or 3G, 4G. Those are bigger waves, and those bigger waves can go through objects and us. All that's left to monetize are these crummy little millimeter waves. And the industry's spinning it that, oh, we're gonna have powerful downloads. You can stream your devices. You can download a movie in 8 seconds. We'll take a look and see who's buying up the entertainment industry. The same parent companies that own the telecom industry. So it's another revenue stream for them. So they're saying faster speeds, smart cities, super highways, woohoo! But those little millimeter waves can't go through objects. Rain, snow, leaves will disrupt the signal. So they've got to pair them with the existing big waves. So all the big cell antennas that you guys see around that have encroached closer and closer, not just on cell towers 300 feet in an industrial park, but now on the sides of buildings, on the rooftops of buildings, they need that technology as well for 5G right now. God bless you, Dana. And so they're adding an entire new layer of microwave radiation for 5G, and because it can't travel far, their solution is to put a cell tower inside our neighborhoods every 2 to 12 houses. So if you guys don't take the bull by the horn and start working with your community, talking with your zoning board and saying, please walk us through what do we have on the books for wireless communication facilities. And if you don't have a setback from these sensitive population areas, right? If you don't have something in there about the trees, then they can just come in and lop them down or lop them in half. They don't even remove them sometimes, they just clear cut them so their signals can go through. This is horrible for our environment. There are many things that you can build into your local zoning bylaws. This free online publication is called Reinventing Wires by Dr. Timothy Sheckley. And he takes our towns through what all these pitfalls are. Wireless is crummy technology, highly profitable, unreliable, damages your data, damages your security, slow, but the industry's only been selling us that. Hardwired to and through the premises is the proper response. Now, fiber optics is great. What the industry would like to do, though, is just bring these high-speed fiber optic cables down your road and then throw up the wireless antennas off of that. We don't want that. We want fiber to the premises. My daughter's godparents are on a 3-year stint in Switzerland, and he just sent me an article that in their town of Morges, they are the pilot town, one of several pilot towns in Switzerland, and their big project is fiber to the home. And then you don't need wireless out in your community to these extents, right? So the message is not no technology, it's safe technology, and we know how to do it. There are so many good people working on this. There's a nonprofit group called Americans for Responsible Technology, and they're taking all the best practices and putting them into templates that you can just go grab, take it to your town and say, look, here's a sample ordinance. Let's compare this to what we have on the books for our zoning ordinance. What are the gaps? And let's get on the ball quickly before these things start showing up in our neighborhoods. They're all over Boston. They're coming into communities everywhere. When Burlington got their first application, they knew enough in their community. They had questions, and Verizon wasn't able to answer their questions. So they formed a town-wide committee, somebody from all their boards, including health, and they came up with a small cell policy that said we have preferred areas. We prefer that these cell towers, any cell tower, goes into the industrial parks. Next would be commercial. Residential would be the bottom of the list, right? So here in Massachusetts, we have great examples. 20 years ago, Wayland, there was a resident there who pro bonoed and reworked their bylaws. They've had a 900-foot setback forever. And when the industry came in recently and wanted to put up a cell tower at their rod and gun club, they said, Our bylaws say, no, thank you. And that was bordering a neighborhood. So you have to get the law in your town to recognize that others are way ahead of you if you have not already done this legwork. And they won't know, because all they've heard from is industry. So I want to finish with two really important things. At the end of 2019, the FCC reaffirmed these toxic levels of microwave radiation. Once that determination was filed in something called the Federal Register, that yes, these limits are fine, then the lawsuits happen. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. runs the Children's Health Defense. They're a team of lawyers that try to protect our children from environmental toxins. And the Environmental Health Trust, which is run by this Nobel Peace Prize laureate scientist, Dr. Deborah Davis, who brought her team to the State House in 2015. They sued the FCC, as did other individual parties. The courts combined those cases, and in the summer of 2021, it was actually on Friday the 13th of August, the courts ruled that the FCC had no homework to show to justify keeping this much radiation exposure to the public. And meanwhile, the people who prepared those court cases, there had been open dockets at the FCC, and for years people poured in the science, the medicine, the harmed, the injured, the disabled, the dead. And they presented the judges with 11,000 pages of evidence in the public record. So the judges are looking at 27 binders of this evidence, and they're looking at the FCC attorneys going, so please show us your homework. And they got nothing. And they went, oh, the FDA said it's okay. So now it's, well, please show us what the FDA did for their homework. And we know 20 years ago, the FDA commissioned this National Toxicology Program study 20 years ago. But now there are new people running this radiation area of the FDA, led by Dr. Jeffrey Shuren. He turned around to the FCC and said, oh, it's fine, keep doing what you're doing, after his own government agency determined clear evidence of cancers and DNA damage. Well, we know now not to take anything at face value. So when you look into Dr. Jeffrey Shuren's background, his wife is a partner in a law firm that represents the wireless industry. Right? And this goes all the way up to the World Health Organization. People will say, well, I'm fact-checking you, and look, the World Health Organization says it's inconclusive. They don't actually tell you that there's two groups at the WHO working on electromagnetic fields. One is industry-backed, the other is independent science. Once this animal study was completed, in 2011, the WHO classified this as a group 2B possible human carcinogen. Same category as lead, thalidomide, DDT, and a whole host of other chemicals. Then the industry will say, oh, that's just one study. Right on the heels of this, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy corroborated everything we found in another large study that they did on cell tower radiation. So the courts this past summer determined that the FCC was arbitrary and capricious. Basically, they didn't do their homework in making that ruling that you can still radiate the public at these levels. So they remanded it back to the FCC. We know they're going to drag this out forever, right? I recently heard from Dr. Linda Birnbaum, who was the head of the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences. So she was the boss over the NTP, National Toxicology Program, when this was all happening. And she said, oftentimes it does have to bubble up from the local level, the state level, and then up to the federal level. She said, there are some bad people in government today, no doubt, but there are also some very good people. So we just want to do our homework at every turn and find out who's good, who's not, and what can we do to empower our local and state public servants. So we have bills right now that are active. We haven't talked much about smart meters, but that's something you should all be tuning into. So if we take a step back and say, okay, where's all this radiation coming from? We've talked about our own devices. We've talked about how we can address that, right? We've talked about cell towers. We've talked about the new 5G small cells. But the utility companies are taking our old analog meters. When I was little and I'd play hide and seek, I'd be hiding in the bushes. And I was one of 10 kids, so it took a while to find everybody. So I would watch the little dials go around on the meters on our house just to keep myself entertained. Those were good mechanical analog meters, right? Now what the industry is doing is talking our towns into not having to pay the meter readers who always walk the neighborhood. So now we're getting rid of people's jobs, right? And then they went to a guy in a truck who'll drive by with his scanner for 1 second and point it at your house and get the reading through wireless radiation. But they've put radio frequency antennas on those meters. And first they did electric, now they're starting to transition the gas and the water. And if you get solar, you get a new electric meter with that, that if any of it has an FCC ID number on it, that means it's transmitting radiation. So I did a little video when we were testifying with the Department of Public Utilities in my dining room, and I have 2 meters on the other side of the wall because we invested in a solar system. So we have 2 meters, and I put my daughter's doll next to it as if it were a child. What happens if you have a child on the other side of this wall? And it pulsed 17,000 times a day for a reading once a month. We have had a medical conference. We've had 2 now, international medical conferences where we bring in world-leading doctors and scientists, and we went through the processes of getting this accredited. That is a rigorous process. You don't get a medical conference just willy-nilly. We now have professional training for your doctors, your nurses, your first responders, and all of the other healthcare providers in your life. Until May 1st, they can register. They have to complete the training online by May 17th, but there's 24.5 continuing medical education credits. And at the medical conference, these doctors were saying, when these smart meters go in, we see an influx of people developing microwave sickness. When these small cell towers show up in people's yards or on their block, we see an influx of people getting sick from microwave radiation. So I know it's a lot. I know it's like drinking water out of a fire hose when we first learn about this, and it's completely overwhelming. And when my kids were overwhelmed, I'd say, okay, sweetie, go scream into the pillow. Physically get it out of your body, and then come back and we'll talk about whatever needs to be addressed. The best document we have in our country is the 5G report out of New Hampshire. So I mentioned that woman, Deb Hodgson, brought me up to New Hampshire to do some educating. When her state rep knocked on her door and she taught him what was going on, he's an engineer. And our engineers have only been taught that you have to have heat to have harm. So this flew in the face of anything that an engineer, a physicist, a technologist has been taught. But he's a good man and a good public servant. One of my hardest lessons, 1, don't go it alone, but 2, it's a rare public servant that's also a public leader. So we have to empower them to make them feel good enough about this that they feel compelled to do something. He went off on his own and started investigating. He wrote a bill. Deb introduced me to him. I gave him some feedback on his bill. God love him, he got in his car in New Hampshire, and the 2 of them drove down to my home in Ashland, and we spent the afternoon connecting the dots for him. Why have Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, AM Best, and the other major insurers all walked away from this? They have long since recognized this is a leading world risk, and they're not covering for damages. So that leaves our towns holding the bags for liability. That's an important point to make with your town. So Pat Abrami wrote this bill, and he just nailed it. He said, why does that legal fine print in our phone say, keep it off our bodies? Why does the insurance industry walk away from this? Why do other countries have 100 times less radiation exposure than what we have here? Why does the FCC ignore the non-thermal science? Why is nobody looking at the cumulative effect? Because with any toxin, the more exposure you have, the higher the odds that you're going to have a fallout from it, right? So he nailed it in this. He asked me to come up and testify. We asked the retired president of Microsoft Canada. He flew in, one of the world's leading scientists from McGill, who has caused cancer in his lab using radio frequency. He came down and testified, plus a bunch of citizens who have been impacted, and biologists who know what it's doing to our environment. We got that bill through the House Committee on Science, Tech, and Energy. We got it through the Senate Committee on Health and Human Services. Governor Sununu signed it into law that they had to investigate. They got doctors, they got scientists, they got engineers, they got their, state level people too to come in and sit on this commission. And the industry, for the first time ever, we had the industry say their say, and then the non-paid scientists and doctors tell the facts. This document is our country's leading single source of information. So 15 recommendations, and they document our captured federal agencies. So now you guys have such power to go and have these conversations with your towns and say, look, here is a government commission report. And now they've introduced a bill this session to start with setbacks, and in the science, there's a curve that goes like this. Over here you see a lot more dead people. Over here where the slope starts coming down at about 500 meters or 1,640 feet, you see it's starting to come down. It doesn't actually start leveling off with regular population deaths until about 1,000 meters. So they have introduced legislation to put in a 500-meter setback for any new wireless infrastructure. You know, you can only eat the elephant one bite at a time. So there are good things happening. Our commission bill in Massachusetts has advanced out of the first committee. It's now with the Senate Ways and Means Committee, and we would love to see it enacted. So I'll probably be sending some things out in the coming weeks to say, please everybody, either put in a call or send in a letter. Here's who you want to send it to, and tell them why you want safe technology. So, lots of good things happening, and now that you know, you're halfway there. All you need to do now is fix it, right? I have a sign-up sheet that I will pass around. If you're not already on my list, tomorrow I will send out a set of slides that I've developed. Because again, don't take my word on any of this. Do your own homework. But I've teed things up so you can just hit links and start drilling right down to the facts. So just print very neatly, because if I can't read it, I can't transcribe it into my emails. So thank you all for your time. I'd be honored to answer any questions until they come to kick us out.
I have one question. You were talking about the bio-initiative report?
Yes.
Yeah, I might have missed it, but who were the authors of that report?
There were 17 international scientists.
But if I were to reference it, who would I?
Dr. David Carpenter and Cindy Sage.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So you're more than welcome to take the little cards for handouts there. If you go to Massachusetts for Safe Technology, you will find a ton of information there. Being a tech writer, I got way in over my head and I couldn't remember where to find credible resources that I wanted to share later. So I just created a simple little research repository. No pictures, no bells, no whistles, just bulleted information broken down by category. So if you were to go to the science page, you would find the bio-initiative report. I've got a page for legal stuff that's going on, Wi-Fi in schools, children, neurotoxicity, cancers, infertility, smart meters, cell towers, small cells. So it's all out there. But you don't want to just sit and wait for someone else to fix this, because those guys aren't fixing it. And as Martin Luther King Jr. taught us, when we make important, meaningful changes, it comes through 3 channels. The public becomes informed and takes a stand. It goes through the courts, and ultimately public policy catches up, and we've got some terrific inroads going right now in all of those areas. So don't be too discouraged. I know you guys are all kind of blown out of the water at this moment.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is it true that New York State is considering the same setback that the New Hampshire Commission has recommended?
They are also one of the states that have introduced legislation. We'll see where it goes.
Are there any initiatives in Massachusetts for the guideline?
Yeah, we're hoping, you know, I've been showing our legislators, you guys don't even have to be the first to stick your necks out there. Follow New Hampshire.
Just copy and paste.
Just copy and paste. So yeah, we do have one bill that has advanced out of the first committee, it's now at the second committee. And that was done by Senator Julian Sear out of the Cape and the Islands. And before he became a senator a few sessions ago, he worked for the Department of Public Health. He was the liaison to the State House. And his mentor, Suzanne Condon, encouraged him to introduce this legislation. And so that bill has been voted out favorably by the Joint Committee on Consumer Protection. And they actually wrote the bill that we have now. Once we gave them all this information, they're like, yeah, we're gonna write a bill. That bill's been around now for 3 sessions. So why can New Hampshire get a bill passed into law in 7 months? And I'm now going on 7 years.
What is it?
Follow the dollar.
Yeah.
New
What does the
Hampshire
bill say?
legislators don't get paid. They receive a $100 stipend, and they've not taken a raise since 1889 or 90.
That's why.
Follow the dollar.
That's
I went to first night in Boston, and I looked up at the big tall buildings and all these telecom sponsors, you know? First night brought to you by the telecom industry, so,
Wow. So I have a question for you.
yes. yeah.
Obviously, you know that part of the reason you're here is because there's this, you know, a cell tower proposed right in our town center, right next to our schools. And we have zoning that was written, whatever it was, 15 or 20 years ago. Telecommunication tower bylaw that at that time, most people, including me, thought was pretty good, but it probably isn't anymore. And I went to the ZBA hearing on this, and if you listen to the presentation by the applicant, they basically say, and I'm just going to kind of paraphrase, you really have to let us do this because the FCC regulations say that if we don't have X amount of coverage in area over a certain distance, we can put a tower in so that we do have that coverage. How does a town, how does it, if I'm sitting on the ZBA and I believe that,
Yeah.
I'm gonna say, yeah, okay,
Oh,
we
sure,
have to
and
let
it's
them
a
do
great
it.
revenue stream too, so it sounds like a good deal for the towns. But,
Well, this is on private property, so it's no revenue to the town.
oh, though somebody's gonna get a kickback from those cell antennas.
Right, but it's not the town, this is on
Yeah,
private property.
This is private property, ooh, ouch. I would like to invite Rob Straighten to answer that question. He has been down this road. We wanna be mindful of the time, because,
Yeah.
Well, so let me just add one other major point to it. The zoning, the specific zoning variance that I think they're gonna ask for is, and I'm going from memory now, the tower height can't be higher than 10 feet of the average of the canopy within 300 feet of the location. If it's not on a building, or if it's on a building, it's the same thing, 10 feet higher than the building. So in this particular case, I have no idea what the canopy is, but let's just say it's 70 feet. They're proposing a tower of 140? 140 or so. So they're basically going double what our zoning would allow.
So 110% of the median height of the surrounding trees,
No,
Yeah.
10 feet over,
10 feet over.
10 feet over the median height of the 300 feet.
So, what, honestly, the issue is, what the Telecommunications Act says is that a town can't deny the carriers the right to address a known coverage gap. That doesn't mean that they have to approve a cell tower at a given location. The carriers are required to provide an alternative site analysis under federal law. So
Which they did.
they did. Now, have you reviewed it?
Well, I personally haven't, but.
I would.
It's the flimsiest thing I've ever
Okay,
read.
so here's the thing about that. if there are alternative sites that are more compliant with the bylaw, which are less impactful, which, you know, I'm not necessarily familiar with your bylaw on exactly how that's all worded, but there are absolutely ways, and one of the key ones is that alternative site analysis. And so if there are other locations where they can address the coverage gap without, you know, in an alternative location that's more compliant, that's further away from the school, that's,
Yeah, and those
right?
cell towers transmit for miles.
Miles.
So what the industry is prone to doing is taking the path of least resistance. Where can we put it in that there's already electricity run, where we don't have to put in a road to put up a tower?
They have to
Right.
do both in this case.
Yeah. So if it's near a vulnerable population like children, the elderly, people who are sick, you should just flat out deny that.
It's gonna be located within 1,000 feet of another one. There's one in the steeple, and
So
the
the
church
only
right
thing
next
you
door.
have to address, and Rob, you can help me with this if I'm mistaken, gap in coverage only applies to a cell phone call. What the industry is doing now is pushing all of their products, the cellular, the Wi-Fi, all this data.
Which is not
The
covered by the
law,
Telecommunications Act.
the Telecom Act of 1996 only applies to, can you make a phone call where they want to put up that cell phone, that cell tower? If you can
And
complete a
then-
phone call.
And then the other part of that is if the way they qualify in-house coverage versus external coverage, they play a lot of
Yeah,
games.
there's a lot of games with those coverage
That
maps.
you have to point out to your ZBA that can change the way that the town will vote on it.
Yeah, what you really need is a good lawyer.
You really do.
There are attorneys
Immediately.
who specialize in telecom law or land
Yeah.
use law, but the industry's been doing this for
And-
years. They're
yeah.
just gonna trample all over your town unless you have somebody who can say, no, actually, no.
Well,
We don't
the
have to do
reason-
that.
Yeah, and
You
so
need
the
a good
point that
attorney.
CeCe was making, there are exempt services and non-exempt services. So the, you know, the data services are, those are non-exempt. They are not, they're not protected services under the Telecommunications Act. It is, as CeCe said, the ability to make a phone call, email, actually. So not web browsing, but being able to send an email is actually one of those. So all the 5G services are basically, I would argue, are non-exempt services, that they're not covered.
And we
They're
don't
not
need
asking for
5G.
5G.
Yeah,
they're
they're
asking
We don't
for
need
4.
5G. It's good for the
Asking for
industry,
4.
it's not good for our communities.
Yeah, no, it's literally a way for the carriers to compete against the wireline. They want to compete against the
Cable
Comcast
operators.
and stuff. They want to compete against the wireline guys.
Yeah, so folks,
Still help.
I strongly encourage you, do everything you can to stop these towers before they go up. Once they go up, it's a nightmare.
So we've been fighting ours for 7 years. They built a cell phone tower on a dirt road on an island with no commercial or industrial development. We live on the Cape, Martha's Vineyard. On
Chappaquiddick.
Chappaquiddick, where there's no commercial, no industrial, so I have migraines, I can't deal with the lights. And we've been fighting it for 7 years. The minute we stop fighting it, it will go up 20 feet and it will have 3 more carriers on it, and it's 178 feet from our bedroom window.
Yeah, and that's
We've been
one of the
fighting
other
for
things.
7 years. The alternative analysis was a joke. They eliminated every half-acre lot that they could because the zoning is 3 acres, but they allowed this lot because the gentleman had existing use, which he never had existing use
Well,
because
then again, it was to the point CeCe makes, it was
Yeah.
the cheapest thing.
It
There
was
was
cheapest
power there and
easiest,
there was an
they just did it.
interconnection.
Yep.
and they figured you're gonna fight it.
So
See
50,000,
if
I
you
had
can fight
50,000
it.
watts outside.
No,
my
but that's
bedroom.
what they do. See if
Yeah,
you can
and they
fight it.
drag it
You
out
need to
as
be able
long
to-
as they can, wearing people down, and people literally have to abandon their homes
Use a
because they're
group
not
of
habitable
citizens,
anymore.
anyone you need.
So fight this with everything you've got.
This tower is, I just did a rough measurement on the state's GIS map, it used to be Mass Oliver, now it's Mass Mapping. But I did it carefully and I came up with 186 yards that this tower stands from the middle school building.
Oh my
It's
God.
much closer to the soccer field and the middle school property, but less than 200 yards to the middle school building. And it would make a total joke out of the bylaws also.
Well, we'd have to see your bylaws. I mean, we're happy to look at them. We've been through a lot and we've learned a lot as we've gone through it for all of these years, and there are a few things that wish we had done differently because we probably could have prevailed.
Yeah. Carolyn, if you want to shoot me an email tomorrow, I'll introduce you by email too.
Great, thank you, thank you.
Other
One of
questions?
the things that most people don't realize either about our bylaw, which was passed, I'm gonna say it was 20 years ago. It was, first of all, it was the result of a tower being built in our town before we had regulations that is up to 300 and something feet.
No, about 600.
Okay, it's a 600-foot tower all of a sudden, and all the townspeople went, oh my God, you know, how can we make sure that doesn't happen again? So the planning board got together and wrote this regulation. It went to town meeting, and as you know, to make a zoning change, it takes a 2/3 majority, not a simple majority. Not only did it get a 2/3 majority, it was one of the largest town meetings we ever had. Now, I'm not saying it was specifically for that reason. There were probably school issues or other things on it, but our typical town meetings are 50
The same
people
20
maybe,
people.
or something like that. Like 225 people, and the vote was unanimous. So, you know, I mean, it's.
Yeah, and
The
that
problem
was
is you
20
haven't
years ago.
revisited it
No, that's
often
right, I agree
enough.
with that.
And then you do a master plan, because if the town doesn't have a master plan,
We do-
and
we
there
do.
needs to be bylaws, and I mean, we wish we had looked at the zoning when we bought our house. Like, the first thing our realtor said to us is, know your zoning, you can't do anything here. You can't build anything, you can't have anything, there's no commercial, there's no industrial, we're like, oh, we're safe, we're unwired. I mean, we didn't want any technology, and within 6 months, they're building a tower across the street from our house.
Well, there's your point, lady, sitting down the end there, but it's gonna happen pretty quick, because the next public hearing is when?
End of April.
But the question is your town for it or against it? So we were in an unfriendly town where they're for it. They were for it. They were bought and sold.
Oh, I don't think our townspeople would be in favor.
No, I'm talking about the board.
Oh,
board.
well, I
They're not pushing back, that's for sure.
think they're gonna
Well, there's
say,
3 lawyers on the board.
yeah, it's made,
But
you
if
know,
I'm
they're
not
not,
get-
if they're
Oh,
not
no.
telecom attorneys
Correct. I
though,
don't disagree with you there, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
they were asking a lot of questions about
Well-
what you just said about the applicant telling them you can't stop us because of, and that was kind of convincing them that
yeah.
they had to go
So
forward.
listen, if I have your email addresses, I'm gonna send you a set of slides tomorrow, and I've got legal stuff in there that you can reference, and it's just about education. People just need to learn what's current because we don't get it anywhere else. So I will give you very credible things, you can show them. New Hampshire has said, at a minimum, a 1,640-foot setback, right? And they're the only ones in our whole country who's ever done the real investigation. So
Well-
we've got good stuff for you.
There's another thing that's kind of interesting is, they've also requested 3 waivers from doing the RF testing. Well, no, they've asked for that in their application, and because they said, well, look at all the numbers we presented to you are fine.
Those are usually theoretical
Correct.
numbers.
No, I understand, I'm just saying, this is what they've asked for.
So arrogant.
Oh, it is. And they have no shame. And they don't care one whit about you, your loved ones, your pets, or your pollinators.
Back to what you said about, it comes down to the board, how the board is reacting. The town of Paxton, right next door, very, very small town, they pushed out a Verizon tower, just a couple of neighbors working really hard on it. But what they really had on their side, it seems like, is the board was pushing back against Verizon.
Yeah.
Correct.
Which is not what we've seen happening here.
Or willing to listen, correct. Yeah.
Well, keep showing up. Every opportunity you have, make the opportunities. Go have coffee with individuals on your board.
Can you do that?
Well,
Are they elected board or appointed board?
so in my town,
Your board.
we
No,
became
the
the
Board of
first in the
Appeals
nation
is-
to put an RF meter on loan in our public library. I went after a local grant, and I wanted to get 2, give one to the schools, put one in the library, so everyone can just take it out and go get the data, right? Go see what your exposures are. I applied once, they said, we don't really know about this, come back next time. So I came back the second time, they went, oh, this is probably a Board of Health issue, these are our selectmen. And I already knew our health agent was around 20 years ago when the industry was first bringing this in, and he thought everybody's hands were tied. And then the third time, I had already been at the State House testifying on these bills and realized it takes a one-on-one conversation to teach people this. I met with every single member of our board, one in the local cafe, one came to my home, one I went to another one's home, and I educated them. And then I reapplied, and they were still nervous about it, but they gave me the funding for one meter on the condition that the library trustees would accept it into circulation. So then I had to go present to the library trustees. And there were 4 or 5 of them. And one guy sat there like this the whole time, just shooting me with eye daggers, right? And one of them said, well, I want to take it home. I want to see what's going on in my house. And then a third one said, well, regardless of how we feel personally, as a conduit of information in our community, I think we should bring this into circulation. And the reason I even got the idea to ask for a grant to put one in the library is that when the electric companies, the utility companies, were getting rid of the safe, healthy, incandescent light bulbs and replacing them with those swirly CFL things, those throw off another form of really bad energy. Bad juju on those. But they, for part of their marketing campaign, put a kilowatt meter in a nice case and gave them to our libraries to go into circulation, thinking you'll take it home, measure how much energy you use with your old incandescent light bulb, and look how much you're going to save with these mercury-filled CFLs, right? So that's how I got the idea. We became the first in the U.S. to put one on loan. I met a doctor from Newton at the medical conference out in California. We came back and went after a Massachusetts Cultural Council grant, which is state funded. So now there's one in the Newton Public Library, and anybody with a Minuteman card can take that one out. And then out in Pittsfield, their library just bought one and put one into circulation because the citizens asked them to. So anybody who would like to participate as a citizen scientist for Dr. Havas's global EMF monitoring study, if you contact them and say, yeah, I want to participate, they'll offer you a discount code to get this. I think I paid $308 instead of $385. But I just like having it because I teach with it. But every time we buy something, I check it out to see if it has a radio frequency transmitter in it. Your fridge, your TV, your baby toilet trainer thing, you know. Can you guys believe it? They've got a device you can put on a baby's diaper that will send you a signal when your baby soils itself.
Oh my gosh.
So you're radiating your baby instead of just picking up and smelling the diaper like we all did. Here it is. Have you seen the iPod where you can put an iPad right on the toilet training seat and the kid can sit there and
Oh my gosh, no.
we've lost our collective minds.
Yeah.
But it is a neurotoxin, so the sooner we remediate. And the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, already has something called the ALARA principle, which stands for as low as reasonably achievable. They apply that to ionizing radiation, which is the gamma rays, the X-rays, you know, the sun. We would never leave ourselves or our children out in the sun 24/7. What the heck are we doing with non-ionizing radiation? So it's time, in time, we get our government to apply the ALARA principle to this radiation. And they tell you right on their website, reduce the amount of time that you're exposed, create as much distance as you can, which you want to do with that cell tower, and shield if you can't get away from it. And there are companies that sell shielding fabrics and clothing lines and
So
Paint
expensive.
and
oh, it's an awful way to have to live
So
your life,
expensive.
but sometimes you need to get outside of your house.
I mean, when we did our bedroom, the building biologist said, don't stand by your window. Right? The meter just went off, and he was like, whatever you do, don't stand in front of your window in your bedroom. My house was built in 1930, but so it comes right through our bedroom window.
So can I ask a question? Tom, well, perhaps you may know as well. During the ZBA hearing, the board decided that they were gonna get an RF reading, you know,
Engineer.
outside engineer to come in and do an independent RF study.
That's
And
great.
what I was told by one of the board members was that they can't find anybody that will do that.
Oh, it's independent. Do you guys have somebody?
That's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, and Max.
Well, there's a David Maxon from Isotrope, and he works for industry too.
But, no, but he did a good job with that.
Did he?
Yeah.
He did,
I'm
actually.
glad to hear that.
Yeah,
I'm really
he
glad.
did
to
a
hear
really
that.
good job with that.
He really
did some-
has.
Yeah, he
And,
really
and
has.
he, you know, it's true, he does work, do a lot of work for industry, but he also does, you know, a fair bit of work for community groups and things. And in our case, we hired him primarily because he had been hired 8 times already by Edgartown and was familiar with it. So I had had a lengthy conversation with him before I ever hired him. So, you know, I don't know whether he's necessarily the right guy, but there are some other guys I do know, yeah.
Well, the only reason I was concerned about it, this particular gentleman is in the contracting business, and he's a straight shooter as they come. And he's like, I've called everybody, and he's in the electronics business. He said, I can't find anybody that'll do it.
No.
So, I mean.
And
it
it's
would be-
great that they're actually reaching out and wanting to get information. We requested that our town do the same thing, that because the planning board would say, but we don't understand the technology. Well, we'll find someone
you
who
don't have
understands it and
to.
hire them. And they said, no, we don't want to hire any consultants.
No, they actually, if I
They
remember
point
right,
out.
they voted on it and agreed.
I think they did, yeah.
They made a motion and voted to, ask
We want
for
someone
that.
who's gonna be able to look at the
Since the
alternative
guy in New
analysis,
York-
he's going to be able to determine whether they're using the same parameters. What David Maxon found for us is that they basically changed, when they did the comparative sites, they basically changed the hertz levels in order to make one site look better than the others. So they
Yeah,
manipulate.
they changed
They
the,
do.
they
They do
tweaked
that
the
routinely.
frequencies so that the alternative sites that appeared to provide 10% less coverage. But
We didn't know that. That was something that we learned the hard way because it was already in court when we learned that information. Had we had that information prior when it was being presented like you all are in that stage, we probably could have pointed out the falsehoods that the telecommunication company was
AT&T.
Yeah.
AT&T was using to show one site better than the other. So we
There's
didn't
an
understand that
algorithm,
the town.
isn't
That's what the town.
There's an
has.
algorithm to figure that out. And
Yeah.
it's based on the curvature of the land and the topography, and there's a standard of emissions that you take and can factor that in.
Yeah, there actually are, and this was AT&T's RF engineer basically said, there are zillions of different parameters that we can plug into these different models. So they can manipulate the results any way they want.
No, I
quite frankly.
have a son who's an engineer, who's in the military, and I know that part of what they do is to calculate some of the RF waves and things. And he was talking about it and based on our town's topography. Because right now, the advantage they're gaining is not only is it in the center of town, but they also do have services that are relatively easy to access as opposed to some of the more rural aspects of our town, which actually might be more beneficial because they're higher. So we were looking at a combination of that, and this is purely out of financial
Yeah,
benefit for
typically,
AT&T.
right, yeah, typically
Oh,
it is.
sure.
Yeah.
And
And
the
it's
tower,
obvious.
and if the
Karen, you need to
elevations
get
of the
with
site
that.
are different, then the tower on that particular site, so our tower happens to be at like 19 feet, and the alternative sites were at 50 feet, so a 100-foot tower at 19 feet, the 100-foot tower.
It's effectively.
It is huge, yeah.
Right, but it needs to be lower, it would be equal.
Yeah, and we didn't mention it, but once you let one vendor come in and put up their antennas, part of the Telecom Act is a healthy competition clause saying that you can't stop others from coming in now.
Well, there's 25 in this town now.
No
So
other
towers-
carriers on that
There's
tower.
25 listed on the FCC for Rutland's, yes, and they were on the map.
Not towers.
Well,
carriers.
there's actually
Antennas.
25 antennas.
Yeah,
Oh,
Antennas.
Towers are antennas,
so
yes.
let me just leave you with this thought. Out in Pittsfield, where that neighborhood got so very sick, immediately when that cell tower got turned on, they only had 6 antennas up there thus far, and it's licensed for 48.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing too, is when we talk about the height of this tower, we always talk about antennas at the 140-foot tower, but Well, to the top of the antenna is 144 feet, you have a lightning rod on top of that, and it's my understanding the tower can go up 20 feet after it's built
Correct.
without public process.
Correct.
So now you're
That's
at
the job
100, almost 170 feet. What's really funny is
It's a
that it's sited
monstrosity.
168 feet from the property line to the school, and that property line is 8 to 10 feet off the school driveway. So
And if it
we,
falls in.
we call it a 140-foot tower, but if I understand correctly, I think it could be almost a 170-foot tower.
Correct.
I've done a quick measurement, like a logger's trick measurement on the canopy, because I share a part of that woodlot. I live right there. It's a 50-foot canopy. But AT&T comes with a 65-foot canopy. There's some white pines in there that are 65 feet, but most of those would come out for the construction. So it's really a 50-foot canopy. And to me, we're talking about a 50-foot canopy and a possibly 168, 170-foot tower. And the variance is 35, or the bylaw is 35 or 45-foot height limit in that zone. So it's a huge variance they're asking for. And they also have to apply for a special permit, so the town would have to grant variance and a special permit.
There's some question about the legality of a variance for a cell tower. That variances are really a very specific thing. And so, for example, you have this massive boulder on your lot, or you have a funny shaped lot and you want to build something. That's what a variance is for. A variance is not to say, well, we don't comply with the zoning laws, so we're asking you to just give us a waiver on that.
Which is what's happening here.
It's not allowed.
There's really, so that in and of itself
Really is
is questionable from a legal standpoint, that they're asking for variances. They're really not allowed to ask for a variance, because
It's not
that's
applicable.
not what a variance is designed for, or legally what it's about.
So how about this for a legal issue? I've been watching some of Attorney Campanelli's videos online,
We know
which,
him.
Mike, I'm gonna send you a link, it's super interesting on the legal perspective. But the applicant, from what I understand, what I've read on the plans, is Blue Sky Towers, the site developer, and AT&T is not the applicant, but the petitioner, right? So Campanelli, this cell tower lawyer, who's been working at this for 20 years and has taken 8,000 cases, he says that's an indication right there. If AT&T is not the applicant, if the carrier is not the applicant, that's an indication that this coverage argument is no good. If AT&T really needed the coverage, they'd be applying, not Blue Sky Towers, the site developer who's gonna make money off this month after month.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is the carriers don't want to own the towers. They're a liability problem. They don't want to own the towers. They just want to rent space on them. And so there are a number of companies, these tower, Crown Castle is the biggest one, American Tower, actually American Tower in Boston is the biggest, Crown Castle, I think, is like the second biggest. Grain Communications in Sarasota is the third largest tower management company. So there are these tower management companies that build, manage, and lease space on the towers to the carriers. Very often, that's the carriers prefer that. And so that's not uncommon that you have some tower management company that's applying, AT&T saying they'll go on it, but the fact,
And it won't be just AT&T.
Verizon will go on it, Sprint will go on it, everybody will go on it.
And it'll go up 20 feet and it'll have 4
Yeah,
carriers.
and
the reason
that's-
why they're going so high is because they're already thinking about the 3 other carriers that need to have a particular height to start with, right? So even if they only need to be at 120 feet, they're not gonna be able to lease space on it if they're at 120 and it's only 140, because they need 20 vertical feet for every carrier. So that's why they're knowing that they can execute the 2012 Job Act, Section 704 or something, 20%, 96, right? That they can raise it without municipal review, period, done.
They can just claim that they're not getting the service they want, and they can go up 10%.
Yeah.
Right.
It's 10% of that.
So that's why they're going so high, is because they already have plans to, and that's why the tower management company, because they want to maximize the number of carriers on it.
Carriers, right.
Yeah, I was asked to go to a pole and conduit meeting in Cambridge, and it worked out great. It was this horseshoe-shaped table, and I was sitting right next to it, turned out, the people who were running it, and they started going around the table for comments. So I got to really just kind of talk, and I brought my stuff and I'm showing, and everybody in the room was really starting to get that this Crown Castle application is not a great thing. And so when I left, I was walking up the street, and the two people from Crown Castle were sitting there powwowing on the corner, and I went up to them and I said, "So you guys, do you have kids?" You know, and he was just like, "Yeah, well, we can't do anything about it. It's got to come from higher ups."
I hear a lot of
They just
that.
keep passing the buck.
They do,
Yeah, I
so.
have kids, but I don't have a tower next to my house.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, because they wouldn't allow a
Should I
tower
roll
next
that
to their
one?
house.
Yeah. So, any other questions we can help with? I don't want you guys to leave discouraged. I want you to leave feeling hopeful and empowered.
You're in a good.
Because you have learned enough tonight to go home and start figuring out what to do to have safe technology in your own home. And then, it sounds like some of you guys have been involved in town management for some time. Start working with your colleagues, start having credible one-on-one conversations. I can be brought in to go talk to, boards and give a planning presentation or a zoning presentation. Sometimes hearing it from an outsider helps. Sometimes egos are involved, and Lord knows what's going to happen then.
I'm just curious, is there anyone here in this room from the Board of Health? No.
Yeah, when
They
I
were
first started
invited.
talking to my Board of Health, they said, well, there's nothing we can do.
They were invited?
They were invited, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I invited them.
And
And
your
ZBA
wonderful
was-
cable
yeah.
station has been
ZBA.
recording tonight, so this is going to be widely available in your community.
Can I just say one more thing?
Sure.
I would just say that the website, CeCe was talking about her website, Massachusetts for Safe Technology, is a really good place to go pilfer information, look for links and information to email to the Zoning Board of Appeals, which is on this handout that Dave was just handing out. That's a good place to, the Massachusetts for Safe Technology website is a great place to find information to email to the Zoning Board.
Ton of stuff there.
Good trying.
Good job,
Yeah.
CeCe.
We
Thank
haven't
you.
seen the handout, where is it?
Oh, here.
You know, you just you made a good point too, actually. They want to add on to the tower because they have enough height for one.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thanks for coming out tonight, everybody.